Well, what an interesting race that was at Qatar. 23 races completed, one more remaining, and I think that was the most topsy-turvy race in regards to just race direction, not stewarding, which we'll get to shortly, that I have seen in quite some time. And that's saying something about the FIA, because I guess this is what happens when you let a race director direct every single race session in F3, F2 and F1 in a sprint race weekend, and it's only his second week in the job. But hey ho, that's the FIA for you. Who knows what more shenanigans are in store in regards to that organisation, but it wouldn't surprise me if Formula One management are seriously looking at moving away from the FIA, especially if Mohammed bin Sulayem gets re-elected as the president of the FIA next year. So yes, stay tuned for that. But there was some racing that did occur. The race itself, I think, was okay. Now I've had a chance to sit back and actually assess everything that happened. I think you can very easily get wrapped up in the drama that unfolded in regards to penalties and the severity of the penalties as well, and the race direction and safety cars. But the actual race as a whole, I think, was kind of middle of the ground race. I don't think it was actually amazing. I would say it's probably a 6 out of 10. It could have been a lot higher if we wasn't robbed of a battle for the race win, which we were. But arguably, when you look back at it, rightfully so, because the penalty is correctly been given, which we'll get to very quickly. But should the penalty, should we even got to the point of where a penalty, we're in that situation where a penalty can be applied, because should a double of yellows even been out in that scenario? Lots to discuss, and well, as we just mentioned, penalties, we can't start anywhere else, and you guys have a number of questions on this. So we're going to start with Nitro_Racer, who says, I think the penalties that were given were beyond stupid. But what do you think about the race as a whole and the penalties? And not so much a question here, but we have a statement from Last King 7241, who asks or says, the FIA love making it exciting for the championship. That's why Norris received that ridiculous penalty, in my opinion. Who knew a wing mirror could have such an influential role on the result of an F1 race, eh? Unprecedented in F1. This season continues to shock us, guys. But answering the question from Nitro there about, do I think the penalties were stupid and were they harsh? So at the time, yes, I did think they were harsh. Now we'll discuss the circumstances of Lando Norris's penalty and how it came about shortly, but I have been very critical with the stewards, and there is another question in regards to how do we improve consistency of stewarding moving forward. But at the time, I wasn't sure if they were the right penalties that were given out. And the reason why that is because it's been so long since we've seen a stop and go penalty, and since we've seen a drive-through penalty, at least implemented during the race. And that's really the crux of it right here, because if you actually look back, and I did say this in the duration of the watch along, or at least after the race had finished, but I wanted to go and see when was the last time, for the sake of consistency reasons and for actually having a go at the stewards, when was the last time that this type of infringement occurred, and what type of penalty was implemented? Because that would give you your answer of whether or not consistency has been applied here. And it turns out consistency has been applied by the stewards. It's just that we have not seen these sort of penalties dished out for quite some time and given during the race, because the last time this stop and go penalty and not slowing down for double yellows, and that's the key factor here, it was double yellows, not single yellows, which is why people are getting it mistaken of why this is a harsh penalty. Because the last time a double yellow infringement occurred, was back in Austria in 2021, and it was it occurred by the GOATs of F1, Goatifi, Nicholas Latifi, and another GOAT of F1, Nikita Mazepin. And they sped under double yellows, and they got a stop and go penalty. Now, why we don't remember this in particular is because, well, it's been applied to these two drivers who were always at the back of the grid, so they weren't fighting for the win like Lando was here, and also they didn't actually take those stop and go penalties in the duration of the race. They were issued to them post race, so they got a time equivalent penalty of 30 seconds at Austria for that. So we have to go back to 2017 when the last time a stop and go penalty was actually applied and taken in the duration of a race. That's 7 years ago, and that was Kimi Räikkönen at Spa when I believe it was Max Verstappen crashed, double yellows, and he just kept his foot planted. And I think, if memory serves me correctly, it was just over the top of Eau Rouge. I think it was at the start of the Kemmel Straight. I could be wrong there, or maybe it was when Max crashed into Eau Rouge. I can't remember. Spa hasn't always been very kind to Max Verstappen. But yes, I think that was the last time we have had a stop and go penalty in the middle of a race. That's 7 years ago. That's a long time ago. And some people have not even been following F1 for that long. So it's understandable that you would think, or we would think, that that's a harsh penalty because it's under double yellows. It's not under single yellows. And that's where people have got misconstrued and misinterpreted the rules, is that under a single yellow, normally it's a 10-second time penalty, I think. Maybe we've even seen a 5-second time penalty, and that's happened numerous times throughout the course of a season for a number of drivers, and that's normally taken at a pit stop. So that's why we've seen that, and that's why people thought, it's not really, especially with the debacle that was the handling of this whole wing mirror situation in the first place from the race director and race control. It was harsh in the fact of that. It wasn't harsh in the fact of that Lando got the penalty, because speeding under double yellows, he's banged to right, so you can see on the telemetry that he hasn't lifted. He's got DRS, he's got the toe of Max. He's gained an advantage. Max lifted, not sufficiently, in my personal opinion, but he has lifted. And this is really where they've focused on Lando, is that every other driver who went through the double yellow flags lifted, but they didn't really lift sufficiently, because double yellows, as detailed on F1's website, states that drivers need to reduce their speed significantly, cannot overtake, and must be prepared to change direction or stop due to a hazard wholly or partly blocking the track and or marshals working on or beside the track. So yeah, you need to be reducing your speed sufficiently so that you're able to come to a stop. And Max's brief lift for not even half a second, yes, it slowed him down, but I think he was still doing like 250 kilometers an hour compared to Lando's 300 or something. That's not sufficient to properly stop the car, is it? But the whole scenario of the double yellow flag being thrown anyway is just, I mean, Lando shouldn't even been in that position, because the VSC should have been thrown straight away. I don't know why there wasn't a VSC thrown. The FIA have come out and detailed that the reason they didn't do this is because they didn't see a sufficient gap on the racetrack, because the field was quite spread for a marshal to go out there and safely grab the wing mirror and go back off the racing circuit in a safe manner. That's fair enough, okay, but you should throw a VSC instantly anyway to nullify or neutralise the race, to ensure that that assessment can take place. Then throw the safety car. Now I get they probably didn't want to influence the race, but in the end they have influenced the race by their inaction to deal with this. They tried to manage the wing mirror, which everyone from home with an ounce of common sense could see that was going to get smashed to pieces as soon as someone decided to go for an overtake down at the pretty much main overtaking opportunity at Qatar. why was that not dealt with? And it was a good number of laps until the safety car was called, which was only when Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton picked up punches that they realised, oh, we actually need to have a safety car. And even then, they waited until Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton had trudged all their way round the lap, because it happened at the first corner that they got these punctures, until they did throw the safety car, which is just bizarre. So a lot of inaction there, trying to manage that situation with just the use of yellow flags, which is why at the time on the watch along, I thought the data was glitching. Because of every time a driver came through, they were throwing the yellow flags and then it went green. Then they were stating there was a slippery surface. And this is a key factor here for me as well, and which is why I think Lando and McLaren will feel a bit aggrieved here. And rightfully so. Is one, the inaction of race control to not deploy the safety car soon enough, or the VSC at minimum, to neutralise the race. There shouldn't have been double yellows thrown, in my personal opinion. I think a double yellow, as detailed there, is when there's a marshal on circuit. We've seen them thrown when there's a race, a recovery vehicle on circuit, a car on circuit. That's what double yellows are thrown for. They're not ever really thrown for parts being like a bit of debris, basically. Now, it depends on what you want to define as a hazard, I guess. That's really where it comes down here to the wording. You're getting kind of technical speak of what you define to be a particular hazard. It's that kind of all or any situation again in the regulations, because for me, yes, that is a hazard, a wing mirror, but it's not a hazard that's suitable really for double yellows to come out. I think that is because you're asking, that indicates that drivers are supposed to slow down sufficiently to be able to come to a stop, and a wing mirror isn't really a hazard enough to come to a complete stop, in my personal opinion, because we have a flag that is used regularly in F1, and you might not have seen it too often, but it is actually used quite regularly for slippery surfaces, basically, or when there's debris on the track, or when there's gravel on the track, and that is the yellow flag with red stripes. And the F1 website actually states that a motionless striped yellow-red flag is shown to inform drivers that there has been a deterioration in grip levels due to oil or water on the track up ahead. Now, we've also seen this flag deployed when there are animals on the race circuit as well. So that is a hazard. But we don't see double yellows deployed. So I suppose it's specific in the scenario of what the race director deems to be kind of acceptable at the time, of whether or not if it's a yellow and red flag, or if it's a double yellow. I guess because we've got the benefit of hindsight, maybe double yellow, because we saw how that was so destroyed. But a double yellow, people will argue that is the case. But you've got the likes of Alex Brundle, seasoned racing car driver, endurance racer, a Le Mans winner, commentator of F2, so he's familiar with the flag procedures implemented in the junior formulas and F1 itself, because he works for F1 TV, and he tweeted similar thoughts in the fact of why was the yellow and red flag not used, as it's so often used to detail that there's debris out on circuit. Drivers would still be a bit cautious because they'd be aware that there's debris coming up, especially if you're heading down into turn one. But ultimately, it should have been a VSC. There shouldn't have been the situation where Lando is caught out by double yellows. Yes, he's banged to rights, but the race direction in general was just poor this weekend, and I guess that's what happens at the FIA when you've sacked everyone basically, and you've got a guy having to do and direct every single race session of the weekend, and the most important race session of the weekend, which is on the Sunday, the F1 main race. He is at his most sleep deprived, no doubt, and most worn out. So yeah, absolutely bizarre decisions there by race control, and it could have been all avoided, and we could have been in for a great end to the race, because really that's ruined a battle for the lead. We already saw Lando and Max go side by side on the first safety car restart. And so in defense of the stewards, they applied consistency there. It's race control's fault. But where I will fault the stewards is how long it took them to implement that penalty. Now, in most instances, a stop and go penalty is it's pretty much a race ender in most scenarios. But in particular for Lando, it was so bad because when it was actually applied, it was so many laps after the safety car was deployed, that Lando didn't have an opportunity to build up a gap at all. Really, you should be able to see the telemetry instantly and see that he hasn't lifted. And it's only because Max Verstappen pretty much flagged it on the radio that Lando's gained on him, because he knew he lifted himself, that the stewards investigate it. Now, it's clever from Max. He's aware of what's happening around him, and he's noticed, well, I've lifted. Lando probably hasn't. At least maybe in the realm of not sufficiently. He may have done because he had DRS open and he probably still would have gained. But Max is thinking, actually, that's too much. He definitely hasn't lifted there. And he got investigated for it, and rightfully so, bang to rights, got the penalty. But why did that take so long? Why did that take so long? Because Max was complaining on the radio that very lap, or at least the next lap, I think it was. So there's not a lot of time there between Max, the yellow flag's coming out, Lando not lifting, and then Max complaining on the radio. Why did they not deploy it or apply that penalty until the safety car period? Surely they can, especially when it's such a simple thing of looking at the telemetry, which they have access to. Why was that not investigated? So a strange one there. Maybe it's the case of, I'm not entirely sure how the procedure works. I know for most incidents that the race director has to basically pass that over to the stewards, and then the stewards investigate it. So was it a case of another scenario here of where the race director is just basically just falling asleep at the wheel and just slept on it and didn't react quick enough to passing that over to the stewards? Maybe the stewards actually did not take that long to apply the penalty once they were given the go-ahead to look at it. I'm not entirely sure. This is the problem with how kind of stewarding works, is that nothing is really transparent of how the whole procedure works and what they kind of have available to them and their thought process. And that kind of brings us on to a future question. I won't get onto it just yet about how stewarding can be improved and improve better consistency. But yeah, poor there really all round. That whole scenario was just so messy, and it should have been handled. It's just so easy for it to be so much cleaner as well. It doesn't even require that much critical thinking, you know. And no doubt they'll learn from it, of course, but will this result in this new race director losing his job this weekend? The way MBS is going through staff at the moment, it really wouldn't surprise me. Now, the next penalty that was dubious was Lewis Hamilton, who got a drive-through penalty to just pile on top what was a terrible race for him. One of the worst races Lewis has been in for quite some time. The false start and just way off the pace, the puncture, and then he gets the drive-through penalty for speeding during the pit lane under safety car conditions because they're trying to clear up the debris down the main straight. I mean, just piled on top of him, and look, once again, it's a slam dunk. It doesn't matter if you're 1 mile an hour over, 20 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour over. There's a limit there for a reason, a safety concern, and the penalty is a drive-through penalty. And guess what? Lewis Hamilton picked this exact penalty up back in Miami in the sprint race. Now, you may be thinking it's not a pit stop in the sprint race. Well, it actually happened on the sighting laps where they make their way round to their grid spot. Normally they do 2 of those, and because all the engineers are setting up on the grid, they have to trundle through the pit lane and do their laps. And Lewis was found speeding before the race had even started, but he wasn't found to have been speeding in the pit lane, and the penalty wasn't applied until near the end of the sprint race. So it was a timed penalty that was applied to Lewis's laps or race at the end, rather than him actually taking a drive-through, if memory serves me correctly. So yeah, either way, he was attributed that penalty. And look, safety, whenever there's been a breach of safety, the double yellows and speeding in the pit lane, these always incur the biggest penalties that can be applied, because safety is the be all and end all in F1. We don't want to see anyone hurt. Of course, Jules Bianchi comes to mind, of course, and we've seen a near miss of Pierre Gasly in Suzuka as well at the exact same circuit, of course, with those tragic circumstances of Bianchi, and that's why these are always applied. So the stewards have been consistent. It's just that we don't, thankfully, often see these penalties dished out because the drivers rarely make these mistakes. So that's the reason why. But they have been consistent in their application, but not consistent in how quickly they particularly apply these rules. And sticking with the stewards, which is crazy to say, because I should be sitting here talking about the racing, about the great race we've just had, about wheel-to-wheel battles, but I'm not. I'm talking about the FIA, I'm talking about the stewards, I'm talking about penalties, and this is not what I want to be talking about in Formula One at all. I want to be talking about the on-track action, except I'm not. And staying with the stewards, we have a couple of questions on the consistency or the inconsistency of the stewards. As Timo asks, stewards seem to be very inconsistent and the decision-making seems to be very off race to race this year. What changes should be made for next year? And well, TC.C is a little bit more harsher. He basically asked the same thing about the lack of consistency, why as that is, how we think the FIA can become better, and the Sunday League football referees are more consistent than the FIA stewards at the moment. And I have to agree. Now, as we've reviewed already, they're pretty when you actually sit back and look at it, and you look at the recent those infringements and when they last had penalties applied, they've been consistent this weekend. But that's more of a rarity than it is a regular occurrence, isn't it? And well, how can they improve? The simple answer is that they need the same stewards, or at least the same team of stewards, week in, week out. So I think normally it's 3 or 4 stewards that are on a race weekend. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4. You need probably at least a consistent team of 6 stewards that are on, say, not rotation, but let's say you have a couple of standbys who are they step in kind of from race to race, because it's a 24 race season. It's a long year. But at the moment, stewards are only volunteers. They aren't, and they're not some sort of professional body. They don't go through a course. They are, from my kind of research, I'm pretty sure F1 is the only sport where it doesn't have professional referees. I can't think of any sport that doesn't have professional referees. Because football, soccer has a professional referees. You have to go through certain courses, qualifications to be a referee. You have to work your way up as well before you're able to manage Premier League games, the World Cup, etc. Same with tennis umpiring, cricket umpire, American football referee, I assume, is similar as well. Basketball, any sport that you can think of, the referees have gone through a course, for a qualification, for exams, through at least the levels of lower tier to get to the higher tier of stewarding. Now, F1, you can't just jump into being a steward if you haven't done stewarding at other motorsport series, but they definitely don't require a qualification. Your qualification is basically whether or not you've been a former driver, probably if you've got a contact within the FIA as well, and it is just run so poorly. I don't know how F1, the peak of motorsport, the peak of motorsport engineering, is being left to people who don't even have a qualification, haven't even gone through an exam or a course to prove that actually your decision making is suitable to be a steward at this level. It needs to be put in place. It really does, to ensure that we get consistency and also that we know the best people are stewarding. Now, the reason why it isn't like that is because the argument against consistent stewards is that bias can get involved. I tell you what, every human is always going to have a form of bias, but you'd like to think that people who would be paid for the job, who have gone through the hard work of doing an exam, doing a course, doing a qualification to become a professional steward, take pride in their job, and also are professional enough to put that bias aside and do their job as objectively and assess things and apply penalties as objectively as possible by analysing the data in front of them and just applying the rules as they are. Just, I don't see why it's so hard. I don't see why it's so hard. It's not like this is some groundbreaking idea that someone on YouTube is presenting. You've probably spoken about this down at the pub, after a few pints. It's not that difficult to probably even try and implement as well. It's how come every other sport can do it and F1 is one of the most lucrative sports in the world? I mean, look how expensive the teams are now in their value, all over $1 billion. And the prize money that's on offer each year as well with constructors and then the sponsors, and it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And I cannot believe the sport that I love is run this way. Hopefully in the future things change. If MBS gets re-elected, I can see Formula One management, Liberty Media, splitting ties with the FIA. And do you know what? It'd probably be for the best, because the FIA is only the regulatory body. They only just they don't run F1. They just kind of run it from a sporting perspective. They referee it, they manage it. But Formula One management is the commercial rights holder. They're the ones who own the sport in an essence, and they can take the teams in the sport and their league anywhere that they want. They may have to change naming rights and so forth, because I think FIA owns the naming rights of Formula One, but I'm sure that wouldn't be an issue eventually. But yeah, the way it's going, they're going to lose that, because they're just at such the drivers and everyone and the fans in particular are just such at loggerheads of what we're seeing in this sport as it currently stands. And I'm probably half an hour into this video and spent way too much time on talking about stewards and penalties, and it's blooming ridiculous. So let's finally talk about some racing. And well, Ferrari closed the gap up on McLaren by only 3 points, because they lost 6 points in the sprint race. That gap went out to 30, and then with Lando's unfortunate penalty, they was able to capitalise on that. Leclerc finished second, and they closed the gap down to 21 points heading into the last race of the season. And well, we have a question on, do I think Ferrari can win the Constructors title, asked by Just Tay 16. Yes, however, I do think a lot needs to go their way in Abu Dhabi. Now, Abu Dhabi arguably is probably a track that I would say suits maybe Ferrari better than McLaren. They've historically always gone very well there, Charles Leclerc in particular. I am already foreseeing a Charles Leclerc win in Abu Dhabi. And of course, he also wants second in the championship. He's only 8 points behind Lando Norris now after that penalty for Lando. So it not only hurt him in the constructors, but also in the drivers. Not that he really cares too much about seconds, because look, second is first loser, really, isn't it? Especially in a championship battle over a race season-long battle. Finishing on the podium in second isn't too bad. It's something to be proud of. But in the duration of a season, you want to win. No one No one remembers who finishes in second place. It's all about who wins. But even so, McLaren, they need to really finish outside of the top 5. I think both drivers, I don't know the maths off the top of my head, but Ferrari really need a 1-2. And with Max Verstappen still performing pretty well in that Red Bull, as he's just won here, he's just proven. Who knows what sort of Mercedes is going to turn up at Abu Dhabi. I don't expect a strong Mercedes, but George Russell kind of surprised everyone at Qatar, which I don't think we expected. So it could be that there's a lot that really needs to go Ferrari's way. It's not so much in their control anymore with 21 points difference. They needed to really cut into that a lot more than this weekend. They're fortunate, really, that the championship is kind of still on, because McLaren could have wrapped it up in Qatar. But look, the way the Qatar race went, the way the whole season has gone, it wouldn't surprise me if it literally came down to the last lap and is the shootout between Carlos Sainz and Oscar Piastri. For whoever finishes ahead of each other on the final lap wins the Constructors for their team. So they can win it. I don't expect them to now, but the way this season has gone and the way so many of the races have gone this year, it wouldn't surprise me if they do also win it. And if they do win it, Ferrari, fair play. But McLaren, it'd be an absolute travesty if they don't win the Constructors, because this should have been wrapped up many, many races ago. And sticking with the Ferrari-McLaren battle, there's a question on next year, actually, not to jump too far ahead. But Gaming Pro asks, considering Ferrari's car has been relatively more consistent than McLaren in the last 15 years or so, can we expect them to actually have a better car than McLaren next year? Oh, how long's a piece of string? I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to be really tight in regards to development next year. There's not too much change in regards to the regs next year. I don't know them off the top of my head, but it's our last year of this regulation set. If the new regs don't get pushed back to 2027. So who knows? Who absolutely knows? The pattern for the last few years, really, for McLaren is, can they start strong? Because the last few years, they've come out the blocks slowly. That's the main reason why they've not been competing with Red Bull this year. Now, there's still maybe a few reasons why McLaren were a bit off of Red Bull's pace at the start of the season. Cough, asymmetric braking, cough. But look, the last few years, regardless, they haven't come out the blocks very well. So for next year, they really need to do that, because I do suspect Ferrari, under Fred Vasseur, have made those leaps forward that we've expected to see from Ferrari for quite some time. It could be, once again, another genius move by Lewis, moving to a team at the right time when they're now consistently going to be fighting for race wins, which Ferrari have kind of always done, but they've been very flaky, haven't they, in this regulation set, that's for sure. So I'm just really excited for next year regardless. I don't think you can really tell who's going to come out the blocks strong, but I think there's a guarantee pretty much that Ferrari and McLaren will be two of the top 3 strongest teams. I actually think they're quicker than Red Bull at the moment. I do think Max is getting the most out of that Red Bull, and can Red Bull keep that development up? We've seen them struggle with the development this year, haven't we? Especially in the middle of the season, where they really languished behind the other teams. They seem to have recovered to the tail end of this year. Is that because, though, McLaren and Ferrari have stopped developing? Because Ferrari, I don't think, have brought that. They've brought little upgrades, but they haven't brought a big upgrade since Monza. So there comes a point where the teams in this cost cap era can't bring really any more upgrades, and they're just they're already focusing on next year. So yeah, maybe there's that element to it as well. But it's going to be so intriguing next year. I'm so looking forward to 2025. And lastly, we can't finish without talking about Zhou Guanyu. Oh, unbelievable performance by Zhou Guanyu, getting Stake F1's first points of the season. He didn't just get 1 point, he didn't just get 2, he didn't just get 3, he got 4 points in his Oh, penultimate race in the Stake F1 car, and Samuel Random says, Zhou got a point. What more do you have to say? You don't have to say anything else, anything more than that. Because, yeah, what a drive from him. What a drive. It's amazing what some confidence does for you, isn't it? It's since he's had that pressure, in essence, taken off of his shoulders. Now he knows he's not driving for a contract now. He knows that he's losing that seat at the end of the season. It's just, I imagine, a weight has been lifted off of his shoulders. And with a great performance in Vegas last time around, finishing 13th, I think it was, a great drive nonetheless. And then to have a drive like that this weekend, they obviously had some upgrades that worked very well this weekend. And being there on merit, it wasn't, a little bit of luck. Some drivers, obviously, maybe he would have been competing against, ended up out of the race. Lance Stroll, Sergio Perez, Hulkenberg. But Hulkenberg was having a poor weekend anyway. Perez, you never know which Perez is going to turn up. And we know that Colapinto was at the back, as was Ocon and so forth. So all those drivers were starting behind Zhou Guanyu at the start of this race. And he did well to avoid the incident between Albon and Stroll. He was in the right place at the right time to capitalise, and he had genuine pace this weekend. Like, the Stake F1 car wasn't the slowest car throughout the duration of the weekend, so a step in the right direction for them. About time they actually spent a bit of money and brought some upgrades. Of course, trying to not spend too much with the incumbent Audi on the way, so I understand why they haven't put too much into the car, but still, it's amazing what a bit of confidence does for you, and mentally. Trust me, the mental aspect in high-level sports is such a big factor. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you haven't got it in between your ears, or if you're just going through a rough weekend, and it's amazing how a knock in confidence can massively impact your performance. And Zhou Guanyu is obviously a bit buoyant after Vegas, and yeah, what a great drive. Not just 1 point, but 4 points as well. And on merit, beating Magnussen, beating Albon comfortably. Just, brilliant. And look, hopefully, moving on to Valtteri Bottas as well. Hopefully Bottas, who was in there or thereabouts as well for the points. It looked like he might score a point at some towards the end of the race, but Lando Norris came powering through, and unfortunately he finished just outside of them. And look, he got tagged by Liam Lawson earlier on in the race, which was a detriment to him. And he said himself he got used as a bit of a guinea pig to help Zhou Guanyu, which is understandable because Zhou looked like he could score points from quite early on in the race. So, great result for him. Hopefully Bottas can end the season scoring points as well, because I feel like his season hasn't warranted just 0 points. Like, Bottas has had some really good drives this year, but has just finished like short with the points, or like the car hasn't quite been there. So yeah, hopefully he can end the year on a high as well. And yeah, maybe they'll be good in Abu Dhabi. I think it's going to be hotter track conditions. So similarly, Vegas was very cool track conditions. Qatar was in the mid-20s. I think Abu Dhabi is going to be a bit hotter than that. So we'll see how the car performs in those higher temperatures. But yeah, a good end to, if it is his end of his F1 career, Zhou Guanyu, a good end to his F1 career. He is rumoured to be potentially the Ferrari reserve driver for next year, and that will keep him, I guess, in the F1 scene. You never know. Lewis Hamilton or Charles Leclerc may come down sick one weekend, or he may end up putting some money aside to become Cadillac's driver, who are announced to be joining in 2026. So yeah, who knows? It might not be the end of him. I don't think we've really seen the true Zhou Guanyu this year, because of how poor that car has been. And yes, people will compare you fighting against your teammate, but turning up every race weekends and finding out that you're always going to be 2 seconds slower than your competitors fighting at the back of the grid, even if he's only against your teammate, that's not very motivating, is it, for a top sportsman? So yeah, he wants to be fighting for at least meaningful positions, fighting for the points, and not just against his teammate, and likewise Valtteri Bottas doesn't want to do that either. So yeah, been a poor year for him. And of course Audi, when they take over, want to go in a different direction, and that's why they're putting in pretty much Hülkenberg and Bortoletto in for next year. But yeah, good way to end the season for him, and still one race to go. It could continue. And that is it for this week, guys. Thank you for all your questions. Wasn't able to get through all of them this week. Has a little bit limited for time, but we have one more race weekend remaining, round 24. What a year it has been. I just want to say thank you, as always, to every single one of you who has continued to turn up to the watch-alongs and to these race reviews, and just continuing to enjoy the content no matter what it is. We've grown the channel massively this year. The community is great. It's great to see all you guys who return and chat in the watch-alongs, and those of you that don't as well. I see you. I see it in all the stats, the returning viewership that we get. So yeah, thank you for continuing to choose this channel over others. And with one more weekend remaining, hopefully with something still to play for in the Constructors, hopefully this season has one more surprise in store for us. I think we need it at Abu Dhabi, because Abu Dhabi is always a bit of a drab affair for a season finale. I still stand by that Interlagos should be the season finale, but hey ho, money talks. Maybe we do actually need some intervention from race control and the stewards this weekend to make it interesting. A la Abu Dhabi 21, eh? Because that's the only way we get any sort of decent drama at Abu Dhabi, is if they get involved, I think, because I can't pinpoint a decent race we've had at Abu Dhabi. But who knows? Maybe the season that we didn't expect provides us a race that we still don't expect to end for us. So yeah, thank you as always. We'll be back this weekend for the last round of the season, Abu Dhabi. What else has it got in store for us? We'll see you then. As always, hit that like and subscribe button. Turn those notifications on to never miss a live stream and a video. And we'll see you this weekend. Bye.